right, let's talk about gender. Let's talk about sex. Let's talk about body. Let's talk about transitioning. Okay.
I don't do regrets. I'm trying to learn from my lessons, but do I get it yet? I want to set an example, but I'm not sure I can handle all my demons. I'm thinking that I should court a vet. I fight for all respect. I'm working overtime to keep in my head. I understand I'll get the love when I'm dead, so my focus is red. Choose the black out on what's keeping me chosen. I've been the token, now the back is ahead. On my soapbox, chucking, showing out.
Welcome back to another lovely town hall meeting here in Georgia, Carolina. If you're visiting here, thank you for touring our lovely community. Welcome to another lovely day in Georgia, Carolina. I'm your local Congresswoman, Jordan Renee, and I wanted to have a quick conversation about gender and the lack thereof. Can we talk? I made a video about this a while back, and it was a live, and I don't think I really got to express my comments the way that I really wanted to. And I think that I fumbled the ball on that video. So I wanted to talk about why I specifically identify as agender versus non-binary, how that incorporates with me transitioning, and kind of just make a little bit of sense of that, because you guys may see my looks change throughout the course of this channel. Not like in a Michael Jackson surgery kind of way, but more so in like, I may have facial hair one day, I may not. I may be hyper femme one day, I may be hyper masculine another day. It all just depends on how I'm feeling and how confident I think I am that day. But I just wanted to talk to you guys about that. So what I wanted to do is kind of define what agender is, and then kind of explain why I don't identify as non-binary, okay? For me, and what I've read, and the quote-unquote textbook definition of being agender is denoting to someone who doesn't identify with any type of gender at all, right? It's a person who does not lean into male, female, they just don't identify as either at all, right? Whereas non-binary, it's a fusion or a leaning between either or, right? Now, if you look at the context and the presentation of people who are either agender or non-binary, you could see how those lines could be blurred and how it would be hard to tell those two things apart, right? Well, for me personally, the way that I separate the two in my mind is I identify as agender because the way that I register masculinity and femininity, the way that I register masculinity and femininity, the way that I register those things have always been in the opposite context of the bodies that they're stereotypically aligned with. Does that make sense? So when I think about masculinity, I think about Grace Jones. I think about Lena Waithe. I think about Tiana Taylor in a lot of ways too, but she's not but she's not necessarily masculine. She just has big dick energy. But I register femininity in people like Prince, like Sylvester, like Michael Jackson. You know, like, I always registered masculinity and femininity in the opposite genders of what those definitions have characteristically been attached to. So if I present in the world, typically I'm going to come off as either a masculine woman or a feminine man, depending on where I am, who's asking, and what I'm wearing at the time. It all depends. But I've never been seen in the world as like a cis-het man or a cis-het woman. It's always been like a combination of or lack thereof. It's never like I've never passed completely as one or the other. It's either or. I've never been seen as a stereotypical presentation of one or the other. I'll put it like that. And I don't think that I necessarily subscribe to just one or the other. I think that I'm an all-encompassing individual. So I don't think it's fair for me to lean one way or the other, especially when the flexibility of that presentation is so blurred. And it's not like, oh, today I'm feeling feminine or today I'm feeling masculine. It's not like it like goes in and out. It's literally like all just one thing, if that makes sense. Like it really, I don't separate my masculinity and my femininity from one another. They're intertwining and they are a reflection of the other, because trying to be stereotypically feminine and trying to be stereotypically masculine is kind of hard for me, because I am always thinking about the irony of that. For me personally, this is not me speaking for, you know, a community of people. This is me speaking for myself personally. It's easier for me to identify as agender because I don't have to label any of my presentation at all. I can just be, because I don't denote to any form of a gender at all. And to double down on that, I am medically transitioning so that I can appear 100% androgynous and not necessarily masculine or feminine. I don't necessarily want to look like a 100% woman, and I don't necessarily want to look like a 100% man, but I do want to be able to rest on any point of that spectrum that I choose at any point of the day, because I feel that I encompass the entire spectrum, if that makes sense. Like, the flexibility of my character, the way that I am, my presentation and my thought process, it all is on that spectrum. Like, my entire being is on that spectrum and is all encompassing. Like, the way that I think stretches across that entire spectrum. The way that I present myself stretches across that entire spectrum. The way that, you know, I characterize and identify and present, all of that stretches across this entire spectrum of masculinity to femininity. And for me, all of it is so blurred that it would be more confusing, I think, for me to lean one way or the other. Now, where that causes hesitation and pause for me, sometimes it does make me feel like, sometimes it makes it hard for me to identify, not necessarily identify, but connect with trans identity, because I am medically transitioning, right? And so sometimes I find it harder to connect one way or the other, because I feel like trans women look at me like I play with transness, right? I feel like trans women look at me and feel like I play with transness, right? Even though I identify wholly with the trans experience, I feel like I am not taken seriously as a trans person because I don't have a stereotypical presentation of transness or a stereotypical approach to my transness, especially being trans feminine. It does, sometimes it makes it hard for me to lean one way or the other or figure out how I'm really supposed to, like, what I really am. Sometimes it does make me question my own identity, because I don't necessarily know any agender people. I know non-binary people, and while they understand what I'm saying and some of the things that I'm going through, it goes on a different level, because the way that we present and see masculinity and femininity is so different. Like, for example, I'll say this: the more masculine I look, the more feminine I act. And the more feminine I look, the more masculine I act. So, for example, if I'm sitting somewhere in like lingerie, right? Well, not somewhere. If I'm laying in the bed in lingerie and I'm suited and booted in, you know, full fetish heels, fuck me pumps, garters, the whole bit, I'm going to act very dominant and very masculine in that moment. For some reason, looking like that brings out a different type of energy to me. So if I'm sitting somewhere in Tim's and baggy jeans, sagging with a sweatshirt on or whatever, I'm probably gonna quote unquote right? And I'm not saying that disrespectfully. I'm saying that as someone who has lived their life as a gay man, as a stereotypical trans woman, and who is now comfortable living their life as an agender individual. Like, I understand all of the iterations and presentations and variations of that. So it leads me to kind of understand exactly like what I'm giving at any time, right? I don't know. I wonder if anybody else has these thoughts. I'm gonna start looking up more like agender content on YouTube, because I've looked up some stuff, but I want to see if I can find other agender people of color, because that's one thing I didn't really find a lot of is agender people of color. Like I found a lot of white agender people, which is great. Love you guys. Gonna watch your content, but I'm also someone who is really used to operating from a perspective of intersectionality. So I can't think about my agender identity without thinking about my trans identity, without thinking about my Black identity, without thinking about my Panamanian identity. Like, all of those things tie hand in hand. So I want to see if I can find the intersectionality of like Black and agender, Black and trans, which finding Black and trans is easy, but finding Black and agender has been the struggle for me. So I'm gonna work on that, and I hope that I brought a little bit of clarity to the difference of why I personally identify as agender versus non-binary. And I'm not trying to define or separate those things for the masses or say that those are the definitions or the way that you should look at each of those things. Excuse me. I'm more so speaking for myself and just letting it be known that I personally identify this way because I see gender and gender identity and gender presentation in a different way that is stereotypically, patriarchally presented and characterized. So I don't even think it's fair to identify as non-binary, because in my experience with non-binary people, the way that they speak about or personify masculinity and femininity is very stereotypical. Like, masculinity is men and femininity is women, and I don't necessarily see it that way. I see it as I've always registered femininity in men and masculinity in women. So that is how I view those types of presentations. So when I'm operating in a certain perspective, it just look like it's just different. Do you get what I'm saying? So I don't necessarily feel like I present even non-binary, which I don't even know what that means. Like, the fluidity of that conversation is so muddy that I feel like we need to have talks like this to try to like work our way through these conversations and find a way to spread as much of a common ground throughout the identities as possible. Because at some point it's like we're all on some sort of spectrum of some sort when it comes to identity. So we all just kind of need to make a no man's land for everybody to just exist. Do you get what I'm saying? Regardless of who they are, what they look like, and what they have between their legs. Just let the person identify as who they are and let that be them, because at the end of the day, these bodies are just bodies, and if we want to change them, we're going to. So, you know, that being said, I appreciate all of you guys coming to the town hall meeting, all of my constituents. I appreciate you guys for returning here another day, Georgia, Carolina, having a good time, man, building this community. And all of you tourists that are visiting, thank you guys so much for coming. I hope you come back. If you like the video, and, you know, share, subscribe, do all of those things of the things. And if you have any questions, please leave them down in my comments. If you want to follow me or hit me up on social media, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Georgia Carolina, Georgia Carolina. And yeah, y'all have a great day. Peace.